The bullet tore through Jake Sullivan's shoulder just as the sun dipped below the Colorado horizon, painting the sky the same crimson shade as the blood seeping through his shirt. And he knew with absolute certainty that if he did not find help within the next hour, he would die alone in the dirt like so many other cowboys before him. The year was 1882, and the town of Silverton sat nestled in the San Juan Mountains, a place where silver flowed as freely as whiskey and trouble found men whether they sought it or not. Jake had not been seeking trouble that evening. He had simply been riding back from the northern ridge, where he had spent 3 days mending fences for the Bartholomew Ranch when he stumbled upon 2 men robbing a stagecoach. The decent thing, the right thing, had been to intervene. The foolish thing had been thinking he could take on both armed men when he only had seconds to react. He had managed to wound one of them before the other's bullet found him. The robbers had fled, and the stagecoach driver had been too terrified to do anything but whip his horses into a frenzy and disappear down the mountain road. Now Jake clung to his horse's neck, his vision swimming, his left arm completely useless. The mare knew the way back to town, thank God, because Jake could barely keep himself upright in the saddle. The buildings of Silverton emerged from the twilight like a mirage. Jake's horse carried him past the saloon where raucous laughter spilled into the street, past the general store now closed for the evening, past the sheriff's office where lamplight glowed in the windows. He needed the doctor, but Doc Hartley had left town 3 days prior to tend to a mining accident in Durango. That information swam up from Jake's fading consciousness like a drowning man's last gasp. His body tilted, and suddenly he was falling. The ground rushed up to meet him, and he landed hard on his right side, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. His horse whinnied nervously, dancing sideways. Jake tried to push himself up with his good arm, but the world spun violently, and he collapsed back onto the dirt. Sweet merciful heaven! The voice came from somewhere above him, feminine and startled. "Sir, can you hear me?" Jake forced his eyes open. A woman knelt beside him, her face shadowed in the dimming light. He could make out dark hair pulled back severely from her face and eyes that reflected the last rays of sunset. She wore a simple brown dress with an apron still tied around her waist. "Shot," Jake managed to say. "Shoulder. Do not try to talk." Her hands moved quickly, efficiently, peeling back his jacket to examine the wound. Her fingers were gentle but sure. "The bullet went clean through. That is fortunate. Can you stand if I help you?" "I can try." She was stronger than she looked. When she slipped her arm around his waist and helped him to his feet, she took a substantial portion of his weight without faltering. "I live just there," she said, nodding toward a small house set back from the main street. "It is not far. Lean on me." Each step felt like miles. Jake's boots dragged in the dust, and twice his knees nearly buckled, but the woman held firm. She smelled like bread and lavender, and he focused on that scent to keep himself conscious. They climbed 3 wooden steps to a narrow porch, and she maneuvered him through a doorway into a simple but tidy front room. "The table," she said, guiding him toward a sturdy wooden table in the center of the room. "Sit on the edge." Jake did as instructed, his good hand gripping the table's edge while the room continued its lazy spin. The woman moved around the space with purpose, lighting candles that pushed back the encroaching darkness. In the growing light, he could see her more clearly now. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with a serious face that might have been beautiful if not for the worry lines already etched around her eyes and mouth. Her dark hair had started to escape its pins, and she pushed it back impatiently. "My name is Clara Brennan," she said as she set a large pot of water on the stove and built up the fire. "I am going to need to clean that wound and stitch it closed. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am. I am Jake Sullivan." "Well, Mr. Sullivan, I must tell you that I am not a doctor. But I have stitched up more wounds than I care to count. My father was a surgeon during the war and he taught me before he died. I will do my best to ensure you keep that arm." "That is more than I had a moment ago." She almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, she gathered supplies: clean cloth torn into strips, a bottle of whiskey, a needle, and thread. She worked with a calm efficiency that spoke of experience. While the water heated, she brought him a cup and poured a generous measure of whiskey into it. "Drink," she said. "All of it. You are going to need it." The whiskey burned going down, but it brought a welcome warmth to his cold limbs. Clara helped him remove his jacket and then carefully cut away his shirt, exposing the ragged wound in his shoulder. The bullet had indeed passed through, leaving an angry entrance wound in the front and a messier exit wound in the back. "You are lucky," Clara said, though her expression remained grave. "A few inches lower and it would have hit your lung. A few inches to the right and it would have shattered your collarbone beyond repair. I will take lucky." She carried the pot of hot water to the table along with a basin and her cloths. Steam rose in soft curls. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "If you need to curse or yell, do it." "I have heard worse." The first touch of the hot, wet cloth against his wound sent lightning bolts of pain through his entire body. Jake's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. Clara worked methodically, cleaning away the blood and dirt, her movements steady and sure despite the way he flinched. She had positioned a candle close beside them, and in its flickering light, Jake watched her face. She had the concentrated expression of someone performing delicate work, her lips pressed together, her brow furrowed. "Tell me what happened," she said quietly as she worked. "It will help to focus on something else." Through gritted teeth, Jake told her about the stagecoach, the robbers, the brief exchange of gunfire. Clara listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. When he finished the story, she was already threading her needle. "You did a brave thing," she said. "A foolish thing, perhaps, but brave. The world needs more men willing to stand up when they see injustice, even at personal cost. Right now, I feel more foolish than brave. Then you are wiser than most." She met his eyes directly. "This is going to hurt worse than the cleaning. I need you to stay as still as possible." "Can you do that?" Jake nodded. Clara positioned herself close to him. The candle moved even nearer so that its light fell directly on his shoulder. She poured whiskey over the wound and then over the needle and thread. Jake hissed at the fresh burn of alcohol in torn flesh. "Ready?" she asked. "No, but do it anyway." The first pierce of the needle through his skin made Jake's vision go white at the edges. He gripped the table edge with his good hand, his knuckles going pale with the force of it. Clara's hands remained perfectly steady as she drew the thread through, beginning the careful work of closing the exit wound. Each stitch was neat and precise, placed with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. "Talk to me," Jake ground out, desperate for anything to focus on besides the pain. "Tell me about yourself." Clara hesitated for a moment, then continued her work. "There is not much to tell. I came to Silverton 2 years ago with my husband. He was a miner. There was a collapse last winter and he did not come home. I am sorry, so am I." Her voice remained level, but Jake saw the tightness around her eyes. "He left me this house and not much else. I take in laundry, do sewing and mending, help with births when needed. I survive." "That is more than many can say." "Perhaps." She tied off one stitch and began another. "Though some days I wonder if merely surviving is enough. My husband Thomas, he had dreams of striking it rich. He believed we would build an empire here in Colorado. But dreams do not put food on the table, and silver does not care how desperately you need it." Jake watched her work in the candlelight. Despite the grimness of her words, there was something mesmerizing about her steady hands, the way she never wavered, never hesitated. She had the kind of quiet strength that came not from never being broken, but from having been broken and choosing to continue anyway. "What about you, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked. "What brings a cowboy to Silverton?" "Work, mostly. I drift from ranch to ranch, go where the jobs are. Been doing it since I was 16. My folks had a small farm in Kansas, but drought took everything. They both died of fever the same winter. I headed west because there was nothing left back east for me. No family at all, none that I know of. Got a brother who went to California, but I have not heard from him in 5 years. For all I know, he could be dead or rich or anything in between. Clara finished the back wound and moved around to examine the front. At least this one is smaller, she murmured. She positioned herself between his knees to get the proper angle, and Jake tried very hard not to notice how close she was, how he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. This was a medical procedure, nothing more, and he was not the kind of man to get improper thoughts about a woman tending his wounds. But as she bent close, her fingers steadying his shoulder while the needle pierced his flesh again and again, something shifted in Jake's chest that had nothing to do with the bullet wound. He found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the way her eyelashes cast shadows in the candlelight, the small furrow of concentration between her eyebrows. There was something profoundly intimate about this moment, about her hands on his bare skin, about the quiet privacy of her home with night falling outside. "You have gone quiet," Clara observed, "just concentrating on not passing out. You are doing well. Only a few more stitches." She paused to wipe away fresh blood with a clean cloth. "You can stay here tonight. It is too dangerous for you to try to go anywhere else. You have lost a fair amount of blood and you need rest." "I cannot impose like that. You can and you will." "I have a spare room where I used to keep my husband's mining equipment before I sold it all. There is a bed in there. It is not much, but it is better than collapsing in the street." Jake wanted to argue, but the truth was he felt weak as a newborn calf. The whiskey and blood loss had combined to make everything feel slightly unreal, as though he were watching this scene happen to someone else. "I am grateful," he said finally. Clara tied off the last stitch and stepped back to examine her work. "It is done. The stitches should hold as long as you do not do anything stupid like trying to rope a steer or get into another gunfight. Keep the wound clean and dry. Change the bandages twice a day. If you see red streaks spreading from the wound or if you develop a fever, you need to see a real doctor immediately. That would mean infection, and infection can kill you just as surely as a bullet." "Yes, ma'am." She began wrapping clean bandages around his shoulder and chest, her movements gentle but efficient. When she finished, she helped him to his feet and guided him to the spare room. It was small and sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. But the bed had clean sheets, and when Jake lowered himself onto it, it felt like the finest hotel mattress in Denver. "Rest," Clara said from the doorway. "I will check on you in a few hours." Jake wanted to say something to thank her properly, but exhaustion crashed over him like a wave. His eyes closed and he sank into darkness. He woke to daylight streaming through a small window and the smell of coffee brewing. Every muscle in his body ached and his shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent pain. But he was alive and the world had stopped spinning. That counted as progress. Jake sat up slowly, testing his limits. His left arm was still useless, bound tightly against his chest with bandages, but he could move everything else. Someone, Clara presumably, had removed his boots while he slept and covered him with a quilt. He stood carefully and made his way to the main room. Clara stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She had changed into a fresh dress, this one a faded blue, and her hair was neatly pinned. She turned when she heard him and frowned. "You should be resting. I have rested. Now I am hungry enough to eat a horse. I can offer you porridge and coffee. No horse, I am afraid." "That sounds like heaven." She ladled porridge into a bowl and poured coffee into a tin cup, setting both on the table. Jake sat and ate gratefully, even though using only one hand made it awkward. The porridge was simple but good, and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. "How is the pain?" Clara asked, sitting across from him with her own cup of coffee. "Present but tolerable." "That is good. It means the wound is not infected, at least not yet." She studied him with those serious eyes. "What are your plans, Mr. Sullivan?" "I need to report what happened to the sheriff. Those men who robbed the stagecoach are still out there." "Then I suppose I need to get back to the Bartholomew Ranch and explain why I am going to be useless for the next few weeks." Clara's expression softened slightly. Tom Bartholomew is a decent man. He will understand, and Sheriff Cooper will want a full description of the robbers. Jake spent the morning doing exactly that. Clara insisted on accompanying him, claiming she needed to pick up supplies from the general store anyway. The truth, Jake suspected, was that she wanted to make sure he did not collapse in the street. He was grateful for her presence, even if it pricked his pride a bit. Sheriff Cooper took down all the details of the robbery and promised to organize a search party. He was a grizzled man in his 50s with more gray in his mustache than brown. "You did a brave thing, Sullivan," he said. "But next time, maybe wait for help before taking on armed robbers." "I will keep that in mind." From the sheriff's office, they went to the general store where Clara purchased flour, sugar, and a few other necessities. Jake noticed how carefully she counted her coins, how she hesitated before adding a small bag of coffee beans to her purchases. Money was tight for her, that much was obvious. The knowledge sat uncomfortably in his chest. When they returned to her house, Jake made a decision. "Mrs. Brennan, I want to pay you for your help, for the stitching and the bed and the food." Clara's spine stiffened. "That is not necessary." "It is to me. You saved my life last night. That is worth something. I did what any decent person would do. But not everyone could do what you did. Those stitches, the way you stayed calm, knew exactly what to do, that is a real skill, and skills have value." He pulled out his coin purse with his good hand. "Please, let me do this." For a long moment, Clara said nothing, then she sighed. $5, that is more than fair. 10. And that is not negotiable. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "You are a stubborn man, Mr. Sullivan, so I have been told." She accepted the coins with quiet dignity, and Jake felt the tension ease from his shoulders. He did not like being in debt, especially not to someone who had so little. The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Jake stayed in Clara's spare room, partly because he still needed looking after and partly because he found himself reluctant to leave. Each morning, Clara would change his bandages with those steady, sure hands. Each evening, they would eat dinner together at her small table and talk about everything and nothing. Jake learned that Clara had grown up in Boston, that her father had been a respected surgeon before the war, that she had met Thomas Brennan at a church social and married him against her family's wishes. Thomas had been full of dreams and enthusiasm, convinced that the West held riches beyond measure. Clara had followed him because she loved him, even though she had known in her heart that his dreams were built on sand. "I do not regret it," she said one evening as they sat on her small porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Even knowing how it ended, I do not regret coming here. Thomas was not perfect, but he loved me in his way." And Colorado, for all its hardships, has a kind of beauty that Boston never had. "It does," Jake agreed. "Wide open spaces, mountains that make you feel small in a good way. There is something about the West that gets into your blood." Clara glanced at him. "Is that why you keep drifting?" "Because you cannot settle in one place." "Maybe, or maybe I just have not found the right place yet." He did not add that he was starting to think the right place might have less to do with geography and more to do with the person sitting beside him. As Jake's shoulder healed, he began helping Clara around the house. He could not do heavy work yet, but he could chop kindling one-handed, could carry water from the well, could make himself useful in small ways. Clara protested at first, but Jake insisted. "You are letting me stay here," he said. "The least I can do is earn my keep." What surprised him was how much he enjoyed the simple domesticity of it. He had spent so many years drifting from bunkhouse to bunkhouse, eating meals cooked by ranch hands or saloon women, sleeping under the stars as often as not. There was something deeply satisfying about being part of a household, even temporarily. The way Clara hummed while she worked, the smell of bread baking, the comfortable silences that fell between them as they went about their tasks. 2 weeks after the shooting, Jake woke in the middle of the night to the sound of crying. He lay still for a moment, listening, then quietly rose and moved to his doorway. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The lamp burned low beside her. Jake hesitated. He knew he should probably go back to bed, give her privacy, but something in the desolation of those sobs pulled at him. He crossed the room and gently touched her shoulder. "Clara," she jumped, wiping frantically at her tears. "I am sorry, I did not mean to wake you." "You did not. What is wrong?" "Nothing. Everything I do not know," she laughed bitterly. "Today is the anniversary of Thomas's death. 1 year exactly. I thought I was managing well, but then night came and I just—" Her voice broke. Jake pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. Without thinking about it, he reached over and took her hand. She stiffened for a moment, then her fingers curled around his, holding tight. "Grief does not follow a schedule," he said quietly. "It sneaks up on you when you least expect it. After my parents died, I would be fine for weeks, and then I would see something, smell something, remember something small, and it would hit me all over again. Does it get better? It gets different. The sharp edges wear down, you learn to carry it." He squeezed her hand gently. "But you do not have to carry it alone tonight." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped on the table, the lamp burning low between them. Clara cried quietly, and Jake let her, offering no empty platitudes, no false comfort. Just his presence, his hand holding hers, a silent promise that she was not alone. When her tears finally subsided, Clara looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for. There is everything to thank you for. You have been—" She paused, searching for words. "You have been kind. I had forgotten what that felt like, to have someone be truly kind without wanting anything in return." "I want something," Jake said before he could stop himself. Clara's eyes widened. What? He should stop. He should let it go. But the words came anyway, pulled from someplace deep and honest. "I want to stay. Not just until my shoulder heals. I want to stay here in Silverton to see where this might go. This, you and me, whatever it is that has been building between us these past 2 weeks. Tell me you feel it too, Clara. Tell me I am not imagining it." She did not answer immediately. In the lamplight, her face was all shadows and highlights, beautiful and sad and uncertain. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I feel it. I have been trying not to, telling myself it is too soon, that I am being disloyal to Thomas's memory, but I feel it." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. "I am not asking you to forget Thomas. I am not asking you to pretend the past did not happen. I am just asking for a chance. To court you properly, to see if what I think is happening here is real. Jake, I am not an easy woman to love. I am practical to a fault. I have scars and grief and not much else to offer. I am a drifter with nothing to my name but a horse and a saddle. Seems to me we are evenly matched." Clara laughed, a real laugh that lit up her face and made her look years younger. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "My recent history suggests foolish." She squeezed his hand. "Then I suppose we can be foolish together, but slowly, Jake. I need to do this slowly." "Slowly is fine." "I am not going anywhere." The courtship that followed was indeed slow, but it was also sweet in a way Jake had never experienced. He found work at the Bartholomew Ranch again, spending his days mending fences and tending cattle, but his evenings belonged to Clara. They took walks through the town as the summer heat gave way to autumn chill. They attended the church social together, weathering the curious and sometimes judgmental stares of townsfolk who thought Clara should mourn longer. Jake learned the contours of Clara's life, the rhythms of her days. He helped her hang laundry and deliver finished sewing to customers. She taught him how to make bread, laughing at his clumsy attempts to knead the dough. They played cards on quiet evenings and read to each other from the few books Clara owned. And slowly, carefully, Clara began to open like a flower toward the sun. The worry lines around her eyes softened. She smiled more readily. The walls she had built around her heart after Thomas's death began to come down, brick by careful brick. Jake fell more deeply in love with every passing day. He loved the way Clara pursed her lips when she concentrated on her sewing. He loved her dry sense of humor and the surprising bark of laughter that escaped her when something genuinely amused her. He loved her competence, her quiet strength, the way she faced the world with determination despite the hardships it had dealt her. One October evening, as they sat on her porch watching the aspens turn gold on the mountainsides, Clara leaned her head against his good shoulder. "I am afraid," she said quietly, "of what? Of being happy. Of letting myself want this. Every time I have wanted something, it has been taken away. My father died. Thomas died. What if I let myself love you and then you die too?" Jake turned to face her, cupping her cheek with his hand. "I cannot promise I will not die, Clara. None of us can promise that, but I can promise that I will do everything in my power to come home to you every single day. I can promise that whatever time we have, I will spend it loving you with everything I have." Tears glistened in Clara's eyes. "That is not fair. How am I supposed to protect my heart when you say things like that? Maybe you are not supposed to protect it. Maybe you are supposed to trust it." She kissed him then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. It was not their first kiss, but it felt like a beginning, like a door opening onto a future that had seemed impossible just months before. "I love you," Clara whispered against his lips. "God help me, I love you, Jake Sullivan. I love you too. Have since the night you stitched me up by candlelight and I watched your steady hands and fell completely." She pulled back to look at him, eyebrows raised. "That night, when you were bleeding all over my table and half delirious from blood loss, that very night. Took one look at you, at the way you stayed so calm and capable, and I was done for." Clara shook her head, but she was smiling. "You really are a foolish man. Lucky though, you said so yourself." They were married in November, a small ceremony in the church with Sheriff Cooper and Mrs. Bartholomew standing as witnesses. Clara wore a simple blue dress and a wreath of late-season wildflowers in her hair. Jake wore his best shirt and a new vest he had saved up for. They spoke their vows with quiet sincerity, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jake kissed his bride with all the joy and relief of a man who had found home at last. Jake moved into Clara's small house, and they began building a life together. He continued working at the Bartholomew Ranch, bringing home steady wages. Clara kept taking in sewing and laundry. It was not an easy life, but it was good. They scraped and saved, planned for the future, held each other through cold mountain nights. The first real test of their marriage came that winter when a blizzard swept through the mountains, and Jake got trapped at the ranch for 3 days. Clara spent those days trying not to imagine the worst, remembering her promise to trust, to believe he would come home. When he finally appeared in their doorway, covered in snow and half frozen, she burst into tears and held him so tightly he could barely breathe. "I am here," he murmured into her hair. "I am home, just like I promised." Spring brought its own challenges. Clara discovered she was pregnant, a development that brought equal parts joy and terror. She had lost a baby early in her marriage to Thomas, and the fear of it happening again haunted her. But Jake was steadfast, attending to her every need, holding her when fear threatened to overwhelm her. Their daughter was born on a warm June evening in 1883 with the help of the town midwife and Mrs. Bartholomew. They named her Rose, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's easy smile. Jake held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face, marveling at the tiny fingers and perfect features. "We made this," he whispered to Clara. "We made this beautiful, perfect thing." Clara, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at him. "You are going to spoil her rotten." "Absolutely I am." And he did. Rose became the center of their world, a laughing, curious child who wrapped her parents around her tiny fingers. Jake would carry her on his shoulders through town, pointing out horses and birds and clouds. Clara sewed tiny dresses and sang lullabies. They were not rich, but they were happy in a way that money could never buy. 2 years later, a son arrived. They named him Thomas, after Clara's first husband, because Clara said it felt right to honor the man who had brought her to Colorado, even if it had been Jake who taught her to love the place. Little Thomas had his father's gray eyes and a serious expression that made him look like a tiny old man. Jake thrived in fatherhood in a way that surprised even him. The drifter who had spent his whole adult life moving from place to place found deep satisfaction in the routines of family life. Teaching Rose to ride her first pony, rocking Thomas to sleep during long nights. Coming home each evening to the warm light of his own house, his own family. The years passed with the kind of steady contentment that did not make for exciting stories, but made for good lives. Jake eventually became foreman at the Bartholomew Ranch, a position that came with better pay and a measure of respect. Clara's sewing business grew as word spread of her skill. They saved enough to add a room onto the house, then another. The small cabin that had sheltered Clara through her widowhood became a proper family home. Rose grew into a bright, determined girl who wanted to know everything about everything. Thomas was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a mischievous streak that kept his parents on their toes. A third child arrived when Rose was 7, another daughter they named Ellen after Jake's mother. She was the baby, spoiled by her siblings and doted on by her parents. On a summer evening in 1889, Jake and Clara sat on their expanded porch, watching their children play in the yard. Rose was teaching Thomas to throw a rope, while Ellen toddled after them, making her own attempt at lassoing the fence post. Jake had his arm around Clara's shoulders, and she leaned into him with the easy comfort of long familiarity. "Did you ever imagine this?" Clara asked. "7 years ago, did you imagine we would be here?" "I imagined wanting it," Jake said. "That night when you were stitching me up, I looked at you and thought, that is the kind of woman a man builds a life with. But imagining and having are different things. This is better than anything I imagined." Clara tilted her face up to kiss him. "You saved me too, you know, not just that night I saved you. You saved me from the half-life I was living, from just surviving instead of living. You gave me this." She gestured at the yard, the children, the home they had built together. "We gave each other this." Rose came running up to the porch, breathless and grinning. "Papa, did you see? I got the rope around the post 3 times in a row." "I did see. You are getting pretty good at that. Will you teach me to rope a real calf soon?" Jake glanced at Clara, who rolled her eyes but smiled. "We will see. You have got to be able to get the post 10 times in a row first." Rose groaned but ran back to practice, determination written in every line of her small body. Thomas followed more slowly, and Ellen plopped down in the dirt to play with a stick. "They are going to be a handful," Clara observed. "They already are. I would not change a thing. Neither would I." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Jake thought about the strange paths that led people to where they were meant to be. A bullet through the shoulder, a desperate stumble through town, a woman with steady hands and a wounded heart. All the pain and fear and uncertainty that had led to this moment, this life, this family. He thought about the Jake Sullivan who had ridden into Silverton 7 years ago, a drifter with no roots and no home. That man was gone, replaced by someone deeper and richer and infinitely more fortunate. He had learned that home was not a place you found but something you built, brick by brick, day by day, with someone who chose to build it alongside you. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked. "About how I got shot in the best possible place," she laughed. "Only you would consider getting shot lucky. It brought me to you. That makes it the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." Clara shook her head, but her eyes were soft. "Foolish man, you're foolish man." "Yes, mine." They sat together as darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, bright points in the vast Colorado sky. Rose finally managed her 10 successful throws and came to report her triumph. Thomas showed them a beetle he had found. Ellen fell asleep on the porch steps and had to be carried inside. The ordinary, extraordinary rhythm of family life continued. Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Jake and Clara lay together in the darkness of their room. Clara's head rested on his chest, and his fingers traced lazy patterns on her arm. "Jake." She said softly, "Thank you. For what?" "For being stubborn. for insisting on staying when I was too scared to ask you to, for loving me even when I did not think I could be loved again." He kissed the top of her head. "You do not have to thank me for that. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. Then we will be scared together, just like we are everything else together." Clara lifted her head to kiss him properly, and Jake pulled her closer, marveling as he did every day at the miracle of them, of the life they had created from pain and chance and stubborn hope. In the morning, there would be breakfast to make and children to wrangle and work to be done. The cattle would not tend themselves, and the sewing orders would not fill themselves. Life in Silverton in 1889 was still hard, still full of uncertainty and challenge. But it was their life, built on a foundation of love that had begun with steady hands stitching a wound by candlelight and grown into something neither of them could have imagined. Jake had spent years drifting, searching for something without knowing what it was. He had found it in the most unlikely way, bleeding out in a Colorado mountain town, saved by a widow with a wounded heart and hands that knew how to heal. They had healed each other, slowly and surely, learning to trust again, to hope again, to build again. And now, holding his wife close in the darkness, their children sleeping peacefully down the hall, Jake knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. He had finally stopped drifting. He had found his home, his family, his purpose. All because a woman named Clara Brennan had steady hands and a brave heart, and had been willing to take a chance on a wounded cowboy who fell completely in love while watching her work by candlelight. The story of how they found each other might have started with blood and pain and fear, but it became something beautiful. It became a love that lasted. It became the kind of story worth telling, the kind of life worth living. And as Jake drifted off to sleep with Clara warm and safe beside him, he smiled, thinking that getting shot had indeed been the luckiest thing that ever happened to him, because it brought him home.